I hope everyone's doing well this evening. I've had to bring myself in from the garden for this, just to make sure that I've got a good internet connection, but I won't hold that against any of you this evening. Lovely to see people posting in the chat. Thanks for that. It's great to see where everyone's coming from. I can see some from the States as well. And long-time fans of Angus. Of course, we're all fans of Angus here. I should preface this by saying I fully expect to be interrupted at some point this evening, mid-talk, by either a cat or a baby. It wouldn't be a Zoom webinar without some kind of homeworking interruption. But I think they add a bit of flavour to the evening, so that's all right. "6 a.m. is dedication indeed. Hats off to you. I can see we've got over 200 people with us now, which is really fantastic. I'm going to kick the evening off, and others can catch up as we go. Good evening, everyone, and yeah, absolutely, what an evening. My name is Tom Dommett. I'm the National Trust Head of Historic Environment, which means I have the absolute privilege of leading the Trust's community of around 20 archaeologists across England. I'll try and get my mic a little closer. England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, some of whom, of course, you'll be hearing from this evening. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to welcome you all to this event as part of the Council for British Archaeology's Festival of Archaeology. And I must say a huge thanks to CBA for hosting us this evening and doing a lot of behind the scenes work, and actually for everything that they do to support public participation and engagement around archaeology, from coordinating the festival through to schemes like the Young Archaeologists Club. I think it's so important that people have the opportunity to get involved with archaeology and to become advocates for the past and to be a part of discovering it and sharing it. I think it's something that really matters, which really enriches all our lives, which gives us perspective and helps us see the world in different ways and from different perspectives. And it's only by people getting interested and getting involved and getting passionate that we can continue to look after our heritage into the future. So clearly, I'm really pleased that we're able to engage with the festival this year. We have lots of local events going on across the Trust as part of the festival, whether that's at Badbury Rings in Dorset or Knoll in Kent or Belton House in Lincolnshire. There's lots going on. And we also have family activities on the National Trust website to do at home, Heritage Explorer challenges to download and take to our places when you visit, and all sorts of activity going on social media, of course, as well. So that's the plug. And of course, we have this event tonight, and I'm really excited about it as an opportunity, not just for us to share a snapshot of what we're up to and how we're sharing and uncovering local heritage, which you might be able to explore when you next visit any of the sites we're talking about tonight. We've got 3 pre-recorded presentations to share. Thanks to Kathy, Angus, and James, who are also here for the live Q&A afterwards. And it's really just a great chance for us to have a conversation about anything and everything archaeology, and to ask any questions of our archaeologists, what they love about it, how they came to be doing it, the biggest dinosaur they've dug up. Might want to steer clear of that last one. Our archaeologists do incredible work at incredible places. The National Trust looks after around 90,000 recorded archaeological sites, and we're discovering more all the time through our research and survey work. We help manage cultural heritage in a quarter of all the World Heritage sites in the UK. We care for over 1,500 scheduled monuments and cover every conceivable type of heritage and period of history. And what we do wouldn't be possible without the support of our members and the work of our volunteers. We have a huge amount to share, an incredible resource which brings joy and inspiration and connection. And speaking from my own experience the last year, I've been incredibly grateful for the heritage which I'm so lucky to have on my doorstep here in sunny Sussex over the last 18 months or so. Being able to access it and appreciate it for myself and with my family has been a huge comfort. Archaeology as the story of how people have interacted with each other and with their environments through the course of human history fundamentally underpins the world that we live in. It helps us explain why it is the way it is, helps us to understand ourselves. All of our identities are bound up in the past, and all those stories are part of a shared heritage, which we all have a stake in. And a lot of the time, the story is hidden and complex and fragmented, but as Ralph Fiennes' Basil Brown put it in the Netflix film The Dig about the excavations at Sutton Hoo, and I'm not going to attempt the accent, it speaks, doesn't it, the past. And it's our job to listen and to give a voice to the past, not so that we can speak for it, but so that we can engage in a conversation with it and learn from it. And tonight is all about that conversation. So without further ado, I hope you're all sitting comfortably, preferably within easy reach of a beverage of your choice. And it's over to our three esteemed archaeologists before we open up the Q&A. Do post any questions in the Q&A box as we go. That's the one next to the chat button at the bottom of your screen. But otherwise, let's roll film, and we will kick off with James Brown sharing some of his insights from the South Downs. Have a great evening, everyone.
Good evening, I'm James Brown, an archaeologist for the National Trust. I'm going to take you on a very selective tour of the London South East region and just one of the projects we've been working on over the last year. So thank you very much for tuning in to listen to me talk about archaeology and the National Trust. Let's dive right in. So London and the South East region, this is what that looks like for the National Trust on a map. I'm not sure if you can spot your local property or site. I have got the laser pointer on. Hopefully that's working. I can see it fine on my screen, but I know from a previous presentation I recorded that it's a bit glitchy, so I'll just try and move it slowly and hopefully you can see it. But yeah, this is the London South East region. We have a huge diversity of sites and basically a bit of everything. We have land within national parks, we have land within AONBs, and we own coastland, parkland, open access downs, heathlands, commons and woods. And I've probably missed quite a few in between, but basically a whole range there. And at the moment, that's kind of overseen by three archaeologists. That's myself, James Brown, Natalie Cohen, who I have actually, there we are, we got a picture of her here. So you don't get a picture of me, but hopefully I am floating around somewhere on your presentation screen. And we also have a vacant post, but that's currently being recruited. So fingers crossed we'll have some good news on that soon. As I said, I'm not going to go through the list of breakdown, but you can see the kind of some of the properties and some of the areas that we cover under this list here. So what does that mean in terms of archaeology within those land holdings? So the National Trust runs its own HER, Historic Environment Record, or as we call it, our HBMSR, really trips off the tongue, but that's the Historic Buildings, Sites and Monuments Record. And as of this morning, we have 11,153 archaeological records in that for the London South East region, which includes buildings, monuments, and polygon areas of kind of archaeology in those areas. And they're of varying quality and dates, so there's probably a huge amount more there. And what we do as archaeologists at the National Trust is we spend our time advising properties on planning improvements. That might be sewage works or car parks or kind of improvements to visitor engagement. And we also look at kind of when there's going to be kind of woodland management practices. We do advice on that and research and learning more about our sites, conserving what we look after and telling its story. And that's really important as part of our visitor experience, working with communities, including our members and visitors to the site. There's also the wider challenge of landscape change and climate change. So a very mixed bag means different challenges or discussion from one day to the next, but really a fascinating role. So as I've said, we kind of cover a large, busy area with limited resources. I'm not complaining, but it's about looking at opportunities and taking those when they present themselves. The best asset that I think that we've got is the terms of our land ownership, the diversity of our holdings and the archaeology it contains. That's been largely undisturbed and protected, but not always fully understood, researched or appreciated. This is not a Dragon's Den pitch, but I do really want to highlight the opportunity to connect with the CBA networks alongside local groups and societies. Actually, with the National Trust priority post-pandemic, or one of them is about seeking more partnerships and connections and supporting those partnerships. So I won't go into all the projects we're working on with local community groups at the moment. There's a huge variety of different research purposes and ambitions. There's a few photos here. So this is work that's going on at East Head with the Chichester District Archaeological Society and Citizen recording fish traps. We have a photo here from the stables at Slindon, where Worthing Archaeological Society are doing some recording and excavation work. And then these are World War I training trenches on Ludshot Common that are currently being investigated by LIS Archaeology. So that's just a really fine, a small selection. And the great position of the National Trust is we have this land and we have this space. And through seeking partnerships with group, we can help each other. We can support groups building their confidence, expanding their skill sets, at the same time expanding our own knowledge of our sites. So when we're giving advice to our land managers, we're basically giving the most accurate and most up-to-date information. So really a situation where everyone wins. So I'm going to start zooming into smaller scale now and talk about the challenges and opportunities over the last year that we've seen across the National Trust, especially for our open access sites, including properties in the Surrey Hills, New Forest, Isle of Wight and South Downs, which have never really been closed over the various openings and closes and lockdowns and releases. Compared to our kind of paywall sites or our kind of property or houses, most of these sites remained open. And we've had a lot of National Trust anecdotal experiences of issues with people removing gates because they were seen as touch points. They didn't actually take the gates away; they just picked them up and moved them to the side to help. They thought they're helping other people, not to kind of keep touching the gate. But obviously that led to issues with cattle management. And we also saw the increase in litter, barbecues, and more visitors presents both challenges and opportunities. So more visitors presents both challenges and opportunities for the nature and the heritage in our open access green space post lockdown. The increased pressure, we've got people choosing to come here over something like their local high street or park, which is great, but how can we go from converting them from that step to the next step where they understand why this site is special and want to play their part in protecting it as well. So alongside that, we have a lot of our wear and tear and damage to scheduled ancient monuments on National Trust land just from the amount of footfall, but also we have a bit of ignorant activity or potentially willful damage in the form of metal detecting. But an example of a site that I look after on a river, I've been out to visit it recently, and there is quite a lot of barbecue damage where paddle boarders have been going up and down the river, stopping at what they think is a nice site for a barbecue or a picnic, and they're not aware that actually they're lighting their barbecues on top of a scheduled Roman site. Therein lies a challenge. Potentially, we could put lots of signs up telling them that that's the case, but this site is quite far out the way. So we do put some signs up and tell people what's there. Then actually, are we going to encourage more damage from them people wanting to go and start digging holes into it? So there is a bit of a balance there to be sought as well. So as well as alongside this anecdotal evidence, we're also, which we're kind of recording, we're seeking to build more evidence and looking wider. And one example that we're kind of looking at is Strava heat maps. So I suppose actually what I'm going to show next are a series of aerial photographs of sites in the South Downs. And I suppose I probably should be encouraging on the chat to try and guess what the site may be. You've got a bit longer on this one while I explain what the Strava system is. It might be a bit quicker turn around the others, so probably get your guesses in now. But yeah, so Strava is a recording app that people use to monitor their exercise and record their exercise, primarily their walks and their cycles, their runs. And what it does is it kind of just layers up these activities on top of each other as completely anonymous data. And what you can see here are these kind of various glowing red lines is the brighter it glows, the more people that have either rode or cycled across this site and in that direction. So what we're looking at here is this. I'm not sure if you've got your guesses in, but if you got your guess in as Devil's Dyke, then congratulations, you got it right. And what you're looking from the kind of bottom right-hand corner of the picture, coming up to the centre of the image, is the road to Devil's Dyke. So you can see that people have been riding or walking up there. The car park at the top. And then they've taken a bit of there have been walks around the ramparts of the scheduled monument. And what we're seeing moving from east to west or left to right across the image is the South Downs Way. So that's not a road, though it appears as bright as the main road. And that's where people are walking or cycling the South Downs Way. So this is a really good, quick visual map of how people are using the site, so we can start to look at how we're managing visitor flow pinch points, but also actually the wear and tear on the monuments. So our second site, you're not going to have much time on this one, I'm afraid. 1, 2, 3, because I've got to try and catch everything to 20 minutes. But here you are looking at Ditchling Beacon, and on this image, going north to south, or from the bottom of the image to the top, is the road that passes across Ditchling Beacon, a very popular road used by cyclists on doing the London to Brighton route. And what we're looking at here, this little circle in the middle, is the car park. And then again, on this one, east to west or left to right, running across the image, is the South Downs Way. Now, the hill fort, Ditchling Beacon Hill Fort, is actually in this area down here. Compared to what we just saw on the Devil's Dyke one, you can see that actually there's very little deviation off the main road or off the South Downs Way to actually walk around this hill fort here, or to walk around the ramparts. And that's potentially because there's a lot of fences, also quite scrubbed up at the moment. There's no signs telling you what's there, so it's really an unknown site. And then finally, our kind of third and final little test here. Give you a few moments to get your guesses in, but this is Chanctonbury Ring, and here you can see the really bright light. Here is the South Downs Way running kind of through the site, and the kind of, I suppose, kind of off oval circular shape here is the Chanctonbury Ring, and you can see here that there's a lot more interest in people coming off the South Downs Way to walk around the perimeter of the ramparts and kind of engage with this site here. And there is a few signs up there, so that might encourage people to look there. And also, it's a very visible site with the trees growing on the site, kind of thing. So yeah, they're going to kind of quick visual examples or snapshots. We can add into that actual survey work that's been done. So during 2020, the summer of 2020, between July and August, the South Downs National Park interviewed about 249 visitors at 27 different sites across the South Downs, and their questions whether they visited the site before and the reasons for their visit. So this is the data returned. You can see of all the sites, about 70% or 71% are repeat visitors, leaving about 30% new visitors. What's interesting down here in terms of us, the National Trust, is that Woolbeading Common and Sisbury Ring are both actually about 50-50 between repeat visitors and new visitors. So showing us a real increase in visitor numbers, or just being questioned on the day to those sites. And the questions included, what would have improved the site for them, and most of these, especially this was targeted at the new visitors, most of those had issues with the amount of dogs or dog poo, and a lot of them actually also made a comment about increased signage would improve their visits. So alongside that, another piece of work was actually undertaken by Sussex Wildlife Trust. They had a consultation on the management of Ditchling Beacon. So if you think back to the second Strava heat map I showed you, and they carried out a bit of a consultation on the management of the site between October and November 2020. 209 completed an online or on-site questionnaire, and and the majority of the visitors to the site were there walking. One person did say they're actually there for the hill fort, so thank you very much. There is someone who knows about it, but of the kind of huge amount of people potentially, or the 200 people questioned at a time, there seemed to be very little knowledge of the hill fort. And again, they were asked about what they'd like to see at Ditchling Beacon in the future to kind of improve their visits. So a lot of people went for no changes, but what I'd like to draw your attention on here is this kind of request for more on-site information. And alongside the questionnaire, there was also the ability to actually write submissions in, and within that, there was 2 submissions were included for improved interpretation, noting that this need not be a traditional interpretation board, but it could include information accessed digitally via QR codes. The reason I put that in, and you'll see that in a bit more detail in a minute. So I'm going to kind of zoom even further into a bit more detail now and take one site in particular on the South Downs and talk about some project work we've been doing there over the last year and how that may kind of help us respond to some of the question or response we've just seen. So we're looking at Sisbury Ring in the South Downs, north of Worthing, and you can see this on the south coast here, marked on your Google map. And actually, I think the next one is, so this is an image from Google Earth looking south. And actually in Google Earth, you have the ability to exaggerate the elevation. And it's a handy little trick if you just want to, if you're trying to remotely look at a landscape and get a feel for it. Yes, it's not the most accurate, but it can give you a really quick visual representation of what the site might look like. And here you can see the dominant hill fort ramparts kind of coming out, and the dry Finland Valley, and then the coastal plain to the south. And then you have these two, well, basically Sisbury Ring is pretty much surrounded by steep scarp slopes, apart from these two southerly spurs, which are a bit more gentle climbing to that. So the archaeology of Sisbury Ring, that's why we're all here. So on our next image here, it's a bit of a drone image looking southeast. The dominant feature is the ramparts of the Iron Age hill fort, but as with most sites, if you look in detail, you can find so much more, including Neolithic flint mining. If I do the next one, you can see the LiDAR image here. And this site is one of 10 confirmed such early industrial sites in the UK. And at Sisbury Ring, over 270 shafts are sunk here to access flint layers in the chalk. And basically, yeah, so you've got the Neolithic activity, you've got Bronze Age barrows, which unfortunately you can't see, they're just off to the south here. Sorry, off to the east here. West, so I get that right. And then you've got the Iron Age activity with the hill fort. Then we've got later Roman and medieval, I'm not sure if you can see these coming up on here, kind of farming systems as part of the farming landscape. And then the Tudor to World War II military activity. And the Historic England listing for the site talks about, together, its archaeological remains illustrate the changing function of a hilltop over more than 2 millennia. So huge amount of activity going on here. And this is what it looks like on our National Trust HBMSR. So there's a lot going on, and how do we start breaking this down for visitors or land managers to talk about the site, to get people to appreciate the site and actually understand what's going on? But it's not just archaeology. Nature has become just as important here to many local residents, and the peace and quiet and the views, the green space. So we really shouldn't be forgetting what makes this site special and so important. It's a multi-layered site, as with many National Trust locations and landscape sites. Not a site in isolation, but an entire landscape with something for everyone. So how do we add value to this site to better inform our visitors about the site, whilst at the same time not distracting from it? So I talked about a fascinatingly rich archaeological site, but it's not only attracted people in the past to work the site and shape it, it's also really engaged early archaeologists and inquiring minds, a place where archaeological practices were refined and developed by some notable characters and names, both nationally and locally. Indeed, Sisbury Ring is important in the early stage of the development of modern archaeological techniques in Britain. And here you can see a list of some of the known activities that have been undertaken at the site. To be honest, I could talk for the whole session about just this slide and the work of John Pull, who did work at Sisbury in the 1950s, to the right in this photo. But I won't take up all the time with this, even though it's really fascinating. So what I really encourage you is to look at Worthing Museum's talks and walks on the subject, as well as their exhibitions and their holdings. So Worthing Museum has a real kind of wealth of information about Sisbury Ring. So now I'm going to try and put my IT skills to the test. Let's see how this works.
Welcome to Sisbury, a Sussex landmark owned by and cared for by the National Trust, treasured for its beauty, its views and its history. We're going to take you on a journey and explore some of the hidden stories that reveal the landscape around you today. Make sure you take time to pause and enjoy the views, experience the sounds and smells, and soak up the atmosphere as you add your footsteps to the multitude that walked this land before. For more than 6,000 years, humans have worked, survived and thrived here, leaving echoes of their endeavours in the landscape around you. This video tour will help explore the impressive hill fort, but it'll also encourage you to look closer and discover tales of human ingenuity, industry, defence and farming. It also reveals the characters who, using Sisbury, shaped the field of archaeology and brought the past to life. But it's not just history here. Human activity has made this a special place for nature. Centuries of continuous grazing and sheltered spots have created a wonderfully varied habitat for birds, butterflies and flowers. As you walk the site, keep your eyes peeled for plaques, which you can scan using a mobile phone with the near-field communication turned on to reveal the fascinating stories of Sisbury Ring. What will you discover next? scale the ramparts, hunt for long-lost clues, embrace the views, leave nothing but footprints, and enjoy this very special site.
So how are we telling these important stories at CISPRI? The last video might have been a bit of a giveaway. At the moment, there is some basic information pages on the National Trust website and minimal information in the car parks. Worthing Museum, as I mentioned earlier, do a series of guided walks, have talks and displays at the museum. And there is a lot of other information out there of varying quality. There's no easy identifiable one-stop location or material to hand when on site. It's an open access site and scheduled ancient monument, so we've got the challenges of, we're not just going to go and stick loads of interpretation boards around. And again, that's going to impact on the site for those who enjoy it for other reasons. So maybe an opportunity is to build on the changing attitudes to technology and confidence in that technology over the last few years. So yeah, we're looking at changing attitudes to technology and confidence in it over the last few years. So we've been working with the South Downs National Park Authority and Worthing Museum to put together 10 short videos exploring CISPRI's stories and the characters around the site. This is accessible through QR codes. So people are now more confident with QR codes through the test and trace. You don't need an app on most phones anymore, and NFC plaques, which people use for tap to donate or tap to pay. So doing more digital content that not only looks at the significant periods of CISPRI's history, but also focus on its wider significance, its ecology, the landscape management, and its role in the development of modern archaeology. A lot more than can be done with a leaflet or a text. Introduce us to tour guides, so myself and James Sainsbury from the archaeologist from Worthing Museum. There's no set pattern or order. It uses existing infrastructure, and also we've designed it around looking at the heat map for how people access the site and how they're moving around the site. So we made sure that all those plaques are in accessible locations. On the right here, you can see the welcoming plaques that's actually on the gates when you enter the site. And then within the site, there is some more subtle plaques as well, kind of thing. So and in with this will basically open a YouTube video playing those kind of tour guide videos. Their trackers are built into those links, so it's not capturing any personal data, but it shows the split on NFC or QR code and the traffic going to the site. And the idea is that data can be captured, the analytics can be shared internally with National Trust and our partners to consider how this pilot project might be expanded to other South Downs or open access sites. And we're hoping to launch that in a coming Hill Forts Wednesday. So you've had a bit of a sneak peek on one of the first videos there. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. But it's not just being lectured at or talked to, I suppose. Interpretation really works when it can kind of physically build those stories in the minds of our visitors, not just taking them, not just talking at them, when it can be simple, effective, and powerful if you've got it right and you have the right objects. So here's just a few kind of good examples. This is one from the New Forest, and here they've used LiDAR to 3D print the interpretation board. And what you're looking at here is Buckland Rings in the New Forest. And the area that's all covered in trees is the ramparts. So this gives an ability to almost look and appreciate the ramparts on the scale with all those trees removed, which you can't always do in the field. Sometimes you can do now on your computer, but actually doing that in front of the person just gives that real powerful impact. And another one that I've seen used a lot on social media, and actually I've heard this discussed within the National Trust, is Chester. The Chester walls, and specifically the Civil War breach in 1645, when parliamentary soldiers besieged the royalist stronghold. And this is where the wall's been repaired. And what's been done is this glass etched panel put in front, and that gives you that kind of idea of the actual activity happening around this breach site in 1645. If you get the angle right, and you can take photos through that. So how can we do this in such a landscape as CISPRI? Specifically this photo, this is Lane Fox's excavation in 1875, first showing stratigraphy, or the first photo believed to show archaeological stratigraphy, and the fact that the flint mines in the bottom of the image here were basically overlain by the Iron Age ditch. So we, potentially we could be looking at putting a panel into a scheduled monument ditch. How long would it last? What maybe are other options? So again, what we looked at here is using some of the technology to try and reveal this to our visitors. And hopefully this is going to play as well.
I'm standing where Lane Fox did back in 1875, nearly 150 years ago. This famous photograph is the first to clearly show archaeological stratigraphy and the relationship between the Neolithic flint mines and the later Iron Age ramparts and ditch. Lane Fox's use of photography and other scientific methods truly was the birth of modern archaeological practice.
So yeah, so obviously there's a lot I haven't talked about within 20 minutes or a bit longer than that, apologies. And there's a lot I haven't talked about in terms of open access sites, and some of the projects are underway in the Isle of Wight, New Forest, Surrey Hills. But yeah, I really encourage you to do get in contact, groups or individuals. There's some of our social media kind of handles there, Twitter and Facebook. We'd love to hear from you about volunteering or looking at partnership opportunities. So as I stressed at the beginning, I would love to be doing it all, but I can't. So the best result is for us to be working together and kind of celebrating that and the archaeology around the different diverse National Trust sites. As a start, I really would point you towards our Heritage Records Online, which is the public-facing side of our HMSR, and here you can explore your local site or local area and see what records we've got. And I also encourage you to keep an ear or an eye out on our social media posts for more opportunities on the horizon, including news about our Changing Chalk, which is a NHLF-funded landscape partnership scheme for the South Downs between Brighton and Eastbourne, which, depending on announcement about funding, we'll be hoping to start from January 2022. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and good night.
Hello, I'm Angus Wainwright, archaeologist for the National Trust in the East of England. My talk is called Invisible People in Invisible Landscapes. I'm looking for the people in their local neighbourhoods under the grass and soil of this place, Wimpole in West Cambridgeshire. Here we are flying south over Wimpole Hall. You can see the Great South Avenue slicing through the older field boundaries, and in the distance, two straight roads, relics of a Roman past. So we are already getting a hint of a depth of time in this landscape. Get down on the ground in the park and more clues are evident. These are the snaking curves of ridge and furrow, evidence of the medieval open fields, showing that Wimpole, with its three huge open fields, was firmly in the Midlands tradition of medieval farming, in contrast to its neighbours to the east. Get out, literally on your hands and knees, and survey the earthworks, and the evidence of the past becomes clearer and richer. Green lines are the ridge and furrow, but the purple and red are the lanes and the houses where the farmers once lived. We can look underground with geophysics. Here's another part of the park. The stripes of ridge and furrow are again visible, cut through by blue lines of Victorian water pipes. In the centre are a spaghetti of thin blue and pink lines, representing hundreds of years of garden infrastructure overlying more medieval settlement. To be able to visualise what this neighbourhood of Wimpole looked like, we can combine the archaeological evidence with documents, like this map of 1638, surveyed by Benjamin Hare. You can pick out the windmill on the left, the manor house in the upper centre, and the small hamlet of Benall End in the lower centre. You can see the little red roofs of the houses. To the right is some ridge and furrow, with each tenant's name written in his strip. Lanes meander between the furlongs. The house at the bottom of the lane, right in the lower middle of the screen, and the lane that runs through Benall End, is tenanted by John Pratt. You may just be able to read his name. If we now get our biros out and transpose the names onto one of the detailed surveys, we can attach patches of modern ground to 17th century people. You can see the sites of John Pratt's and William Whitton's houses either side of the lane, with William Neal's moated house below. Unfortunately, in most cases, the houses are not represented by earthworks. They have been very effectively levelled. You may also see that the houses and yards overlie ridge and furrow, showing that Benall End has expanded. It was a thriving place. Some different coloured biros and more documents, in this case the parish registers and hearth taxes. And this corner of Benall End comes into sharper focus. We can see that John and Agnes Pratt live in a very small house. From here, John cultivates his 6.5 acres and no doubt also works for his richer neighbours, like yeoman farmer William Whitton on the other side of the lane. So this was Benall End when Benjamin Hare and his assistants came with their gunter chains and ranging rods to survey Wimpole. Whilst the survey was progressing, John and William were about their farming business. This medieval illustration gives a fair idea of what they were up to that autumn. The landscape was full of people. There was a lot of work to do. Ploughing more than 250 acres with a plough team when a plough team can only cultivate 1 to 2 acres in a 10-hour day, took a long time. Today, a tractor could plough 30 acres in a day. The other end of the year was equally back-breaking. The 3 men with scythes in this Bruegel painting would be lucky to cut 3 acres in a day. What we don't find through archaeology is the rich and intimate and varied inner lives of the people of Benall End. All we would find of this scene is the broken remains of the stoneware flagons in the wicker basket in the lower left. We get a bit of a hint in some documents. Here is the will of widow Joan Moore, written in 1638, the year that Benjamin Hare and his surveyors were at work. Here she gives her meagre possessions to her daughter, her pots and pans and her odd sticks of furniture and bits of crops out in the open fields. The will is written and witnessed by her neighbours. This is evidence of a close relationship within this little community, but also indicates the good level of education in this part of Cambridgeshire during the 17th century. Here is the map again. Why was it drawn up with such detail? Maps of this kind were an accurate way of calculating the value of land, but were also a way of representing what the land looked like now, but also what it might become. There is a hint of this on the map in the form of black letters, A, B, C, D. These are added later and seem to indicate how the owner of Wimpole, Thomas Chicheley, was intending to divide up and parcel up his estate. This is what part of the land was to become. The little world of Benall End has disappeared under the water garden in the lower left, and acres of ridge and furrow have been converted into the deer park in the upper left, as well as under the garden on the north side of the house. Going back to the aerial photo, the landscape of hedges and ditches cut through by the avenue is not an ancient one. but one actually created by Thomas Chicheley just 60 years before the avenue of elms were planted. This landscape had gone through a period of change more dramatic than anything we have seen in recent years. Every corner of village lanes, every hard-won furrow, every house with stories of past generations had gone to be replaced by a more profitable and rational countryside, but one that looks timeless and unchanged at first glance to us. As an added extra to this talk, I would like to take you back 200 years or so. 2,000 years or so. This is a geophysical plot from earlier this year. You can see the familiar stripes of ridge and furrow, but towards the centre is an odd enclosure with an inner ring. The ring, which is about 17 metres across, seems to be a roundhouse, but enclosed tightly within an oval enclosure. Not far away to the east on the ridge is a more complex site, again featuring round houses, but also larger ditched enclosures. Clearly this site has developed over time, with square enclosures replacing the curved ones, possibly indicating the arrival of the Romans. We have a hint of what these sites might be from this excavation, which was done before the construction of the new car park at Wimpole a few years ago. This uncovered a late Iron Age settlement, round houses with ditched enclosures, the home of generations of farmers cultivating the Wimpole clay, people who saw the arrival of the Romans carving their roads through the Iron Age landscape and linking these once isolated farms to towns across Britain and further afield. Then, like Benalend, this little hamlet came to a sudden end. I'll leave you with this now rather well-known Wimpole find. Like so much of archaeology, a fascinating enigma, showing perhaps that there is more that we don't know about the distant past than that we do know. But of course, we keep looking.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to preface this short presentation by admitting that I am by no means an expert in conflict archaeology, but over the years of stumbling across and recording these sites, I've come to appreciate them and the very tangible reminder of human endeavour that they represent. I can only give you a brief taster of some of the types of conflict archaeology you can find on or near National Trust sites in Wales today, but perhaps this will leave you wanting to find out just a little bit more. You might not necessarily think of conflict remains as archaeological sites. Some of the ones I will talk about today are designated as scheduled monuments and have very visible remains. Others are slightly more elusive, such as this rifle range at Chirk Castle. Chirk Castle is better known for its medieval castle and for the earlier medieval boundary Offa's Dyke, which runs through the parkland. Back in 2018, whilst Clwyd Powys Archaeological Trust were carrying out a community excavation to examine an unscheduled and damaged section of Offa's Dyke, some cartridge and bullet ammunition were found. These dated to the mid to late 19th century and were found in the upper layers behind the bank of Offa's Dyke. After a bit of head scratching, somebody dug out this Ordnance Survey map dating to 1873, and clearly marked is the rifle range, apparently using Offa's Dyke as the target. You can see the rifle range here with the butts from which you would have shot, sometimes called the stands, here, and then aiming in this direction, and you can see the different distances marked here as well. It also says Denbighshire Volunteers on the map, and this is the clue that tells us that this is something other than a gentleman's rifle club. It turns out that the 7th Denbighshire Rifle Volunteer Corps, formed in 1861, used Chirk Castle for training and practice. The volunteer force was a citizen army of part-time rifle, artillery and engineering corps, formed in the late 1850s following tensions in Europe. The volunteer force became the territorial force by the early 20th century. Aerial photographs flown in the 2018 drought by our colleagues at the Royal Commission in Wales picked up a structure in the area of the rifle range, although whether it is related to it or not, only further investigation will prove. The only above-ground remains of potential military origin is this brick and concrete ramp. Again, in the area of the rifle range, but the date and function remains to be confirmed. If we move across to Erddig, near Wrexham, we find another rifle range. Erddig is a country house and garden, but has earlier origins, with a medieval Motte and Bailey earthwork castle in the grounds and the earlier medieval boundary bank known as Watts Dyke running across the parkland. The two Ordnance Survey maps here show slightly different configurations of rifle range. The 1872 map has both short and long ranges located to the south of the river, while the 1899 map has only one located to the north of the river, although the targets for both are at a similar location. The structure which survives today almost certainly relates to this second map. It is a large trench, brick-lined on one side, and this is where the targets would have been housed. It seems to be the sort of rifle range known as a gallery range. They were designed to protect the markers whose job it was to record the hits, relay scores and replace or repair the targets. Now, on this earlier map, you have markers' huts noted adjacent to the targets, which is where they would have hidden when the volunteers were firing at the targets. In a gallery range, rather than having their own huts, the markers occupied a space in front of the targets known as the gallery. This would have been adjacent to the brick wall in this example, and I think there must almost certainly have been some sort of structure against this back wall to protect the markers from ricocheting bullets. It doesn't show well on the photograph, but this wall is in fact above head height. The targets would have been along the right-hand side of the trench, and very likely on some form of pivoting target frame to raise the targets above the level of the trench and lower them again for marking and repair. A certain amount of historical research has been carried out for this site. The earliest reference to the rifle range is an 1863 local newspaper article which reports the range being given to the Wrexham Volunteer Corps by their captain, Simon York, York being the owner of Erddig at the time. There is evidence that this range was used up until the First World War. It seems to have been well used over the years, it being hired out to the local militia and for various competitions in addition to the use by the volunteers for whom it was originally intended. The ranger team at Erddig are planning some clearance and consolidation work to surviving structures and want to figure out exactly what survives and how it worked. I want to move along now to anti-invasion defences. This suite of features guard the Ogwen Pass in Snowdonia. They were put in place in the early years of the Second World War against the threat of German invasion, and they were manned by the Bethesda Home Guard. Some but not all of the features are designated as scheduled monuments. I've been very lucky to have a volunteer, Morgan Owen, a local military expert who has been researching these features and has managed to locate a large number of previously unrecorded elements. The defences include 2 pillboxes, small structures to provide cover for riflemen at strategic locations, and 5 spigot mortars, or rather, the basis for spigot mortars. This is one of them here. It's sort of a concrete drum with a metal cylinder sticking out of the top. A spigot mortar is a type of gun for firing mortar bombs, and it would have been mounted on that concrete cylinder. There are also a set of anti-tank blocks which span one of the two roads into the pass. And numerous infantry posts, small stone-built lookouts which pepper the landscape all around the pass. The three shown here on the right overlook the road. Morgan has also found evidence for wire entanglements which would have been stretched across the valley, and has figured out the system for blocking the roads. He's also gathered information and stories about the defences and the men who manned them. The black and white photograph bottom left isn't a wartime photograph, but is in fact Morgan kitted up doing a practice run for another festival event. Another set of anti-invasion defences can be seen at Storey Arms in the Brecon Beacons. Again dating to 1940, the scheduled monument description lists 2 pillboxes, an infantry support trench, a slit trench, and 2 alignments of anti-tank blocks. You can see this really impressive alignment of blocks here in the edge of the river. Only the 2 brick-built pillboxes shown here are on National Trust land. They are close to the car park at Storey Arms, which gives access to the Brecon Beacons, and I believe that the trees have now been cleared from this area. And now for quite a unique site. This fascinating place, partly buried in the scrub, is the Great Orme Gunnery School. Located on the Great Orme's Head near Llandudno in the Conwy Council Country Park, adjacent to a farm owned by the National Trust. The Royal Artillery's Coastal Gunnery School was relocated from Essex to the North Wales coast in 1940 and was in use until the end of the Second World War. The school trained officers and other ranks in the art of coastal artillery, but also assisted in the development of new weaponry, tactics, and instrumentation. Although the school was subject to an official clearance scheme in the 1950s, there is still plenty to see, including various calibre gun emplacements, command posts, a magazine complex, coast artillery searchlight emplacements and engine rooms. Only the business end of operations took place here, with the trainers and trainees being billeted in hotels and guest houses in the town of Llandudno nearby. The whole site is a scheduled monument, and there are periodic campaigns to clear the worst of the scrub from key features. But the Orme is also a site of special scientific interests of international note, and so compromises have to be made. Moving on, many of you will be aware of the importance of radar in the Second World War and the chain of radar stations installed along the eastern and southern coast of England by the outbreak of war in 1939. These stations were able to detect enemy aircraft at any time of day and in any weather conditions. People are generally less familiar with those installed along the west coast. This one at Rosili Down on the Gower Peninsula was first operational in 1942. It was originally a coastal defence station manned by the Army to monitor shipping and low-flying aircraft, but was updated and eventually became part of the Chain Home Low radar network. Like the artillery school, it was demolished, and all that remains to see are the concrete platforms which house the various buildings and structures that made up the complex. The black and white wartime aerial photograph gives a better idea of the layout. The main radar receiver would have been housed on the top of this concrete structure that you can see on the edge of the cliff here. It's now just a pile of concrete. That's all that remains. It's been blown up, it would appear. It would have looked something like the building in the bottom photograph, which survives at another radar station site known as Graig Fawr, which is near Port Talbot. There would have been a large rectangular radar receiver mounted on the top of the metal frame on the top of the concrete structure. The buildings on the large platform look to be corrugated iron huts. I think it likely that these, or at least some of these, were for accommodation, with the radar operators living on the site, which is quite remote, in order to operate it 24 hours a day. It's a fantastic walk to this site, and you would also see some prehistoric archaeology and lots more beside on the way there. I just thought I would throw in a couple of more unusual pillboxes just for good measure. On the left is a brick-built one disguised as a cottage. This one is on a farm known as Egrin near Barmouth. And on the right is a very distinctive type of pillbox known as a seagull trench. I think you can see why from the plan shown here. This one is at a place called Dinas Dintla near Carnarvon. This is in fact part of a complex of defensive features which protected RAF Llandorog in the Second World War. The runways for RAF Llandorog now form Carnarvon Airport, but you can still pick out a number of Second World War features if you know what to look for. And there is also a great museum on the aircraft site. And finally, this is one you can't currently visit, I'm afraid. This is a Royal Observer Corps nuclear monitoring post. These underground structures were built all over the UK as a result of the Corps nuclear reporting role, and were operated by volunteers during the Cold War between 1958 and 1991. This one near Aberdaron, at the end of the Llŷn Peninsula, seems to fit the standard design consisting of a 14-foot access shaft, a toilet and a monitoring room. Not much survives in the monitoring room in this example, but when in operation they would have been kitted out with monitoring and communication equipment and some creature comforts for the volunteers working in them. They were designed for 3 observers to live and work in them for a period of between 7 and 21 days, following any nuclear event. I have to say that you would have to be made of strong stuff to volunteer to work in one of these. As I said at the beginning, something of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm sure that you can appreciate the range of site types out there to explore. I've noted for you here some sources specific to Wales for finding information on archaeological sites. Most of these sources are map-based, enabling you to focus in on your local area or somewhere that you might be going to visit. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much, James and Angus and Kathy, for those presentations. Those were fantastic, and I think it's always brilliant just to see that incredible spread of periods and archaeology that we get to cover. I think we all feel quite lucky quite frequently to be involved in looking after such an amazing spread of sites. I've got to say that disguised pillbox that's now my #1 pillbox, which is I assume we all have a #1 pillbox. We have some questions in the Q&A, and we'll come on to those. But first, I thought it might be actually just really nice to hear from each of you, James and Angus and Kathy, just a minute or two on sort of your background and your time with the National Trust and being involved with archaeology. Angus, should we defer to you in the first instance?
You're deferring to me because of my age and the
I didn't say that, Angus.
the immensely long time I've worked for the National Trust, because I actually started in the National Trust in the 1980s, working on the Ashridge Estates, which is on the Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire border, right near where I come from in Hemel Hempstead. I'm a New Town boy, and that's where I first got involved with archaeology, doing what nowadays is called a community excavation, but didn't have a name then, but that's what it was. It was an excavation of a Roman villa in Gaybridge Park in Hemel Hempstead, run by a local chap who recruited children from the local schools and the community to help on the excavation. So that's where I first got involved in digging. Then I've done a lot of digging since then, but I think one excavation in December, standing up to my knees in freezing mud, made me think that I needed to get out of the trenches and do something more sensible. So I got into archaeological survey, earthworks and that sort of thing, and that's really the history of the countryside has been my love since then. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy working for the National Trust, because we own such wonderful bits of countryside.
Absolutely. Thanks, Angus. James.
So potentially at the other end of the scale, as I kind of joined the National Trust in January 2020, and we won't kind of dwell on what an interesting year the last year has been for everyone kind of thing. But previously I worked for the New Forest National Park Authority, so working across protected landscapes for about 10 years. And kind of joining the trust has just given me that ability to just expand the kind of areas looking after and the range of sites. So just an absolutely fascinating and very similar to Angus, just that opportunity and the ability to be out and about, engaging with visitors, our own staff, on protected landscapes and such a kind of diverse range of kind of different geologies and site types. It meant that I could go from working on kind of heathlands to do a bit of chalk downland archaeology as well, where hopefully some of the geophysics results can be a bit better. But again, I know that can be quite difficult in all sorts of different terrains. So it's been an actual pleasure to join the trust, and just, I suppose, go to that bit where we have, as I mentioned in my talk, such kind of wide land holdings and just that amazing opportunities to connect with local residents and local communities. And basically, I'm only going to talk for a minute here, but I could just carry on talking now about how great archaeology to be out and about and just engaging with people is. So, but yeah, just I'm given that remit to go and to talk to people and kind of potentially bore their socks off with just why they should care about the archaeology around them and how it basically fits into every kind of facet of their everyday life. So yeah, I'll stop talking at a point now and just say it's been a real pleasure to join the National Trust, and I look forward to some kind of exciting projects and opportunities as we move forward out of this last year.
Never boring, James. And Kathy.
Yes, hello everybody. So I'm sort of in the middle of these two. So I've been with the National Trust for just over 11 years now, and I'm based in North Wales. I have a colleague who covers South Wales. So I have a sort of a mixture, a very wide range of sorts of sites to help look after, from very formal estates and parklands to stuff up the side of mountains. So it's all good fun and get quite wet sometimes. So I throughout. I mean, I have a background in field archaeology, but I've always been really interested in sharing archaeology with communities, and indeed some of the projects that I'm involved with currently with the National Trust are specifically community-based projects. I've also had a very long relationship with the CBA, so I've been a member for, I don't know, approaching 30 years by now, and I'm on the committee for the CBA local group in Wales.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, the community engagement part is such a big part of what we do. And actually that segues nicely into a couple of the questions that have popped through on the Q&A. Questions about the ability to volunteer with a local National Trust Archaeology group. How many volunteers are actually involved in our work? I don't know if James, you'd like to kick off just speaking to, I suppose, some of the opportunities and the work that's going on around engaging with volunteers.
Yeah, so I think it was kind of the Midlands Archaeology, the Midlands kind of region a couple of years ago set up our Heritage Archaeology Ranger team. We like an acronym in the National Trust, shortens down to our HEART team. And this is kind of a national approach to archaeological volunteering. So in my talk, I referenced the Heritage Records Online as a site you can go and look at the public facing side of our HER. And basically what we do is across all the regions, and all of the kind of my colleagues, Kathy and Angus will be doing this as well, is we are spending time kind of training up volunteers who've expressed an interest and get them actually out onto our sites to do the kind of surveying and condition monitoring. Probably the easy bit of some of our work is actually identifying the sites, but actually then a lot of the work comes in making sure that those sites are looked after, and we start to actually research and understand them. And the ability we can do our talks this evening is because we've actually been able to look in these sites in detail. So we've got the opportunity to kind of link volunteers with those sites and get people out kind of actually visiting some of these sites, helping us take photographs, keeping an eye on them for us. But there's also opportunities, you know, it doesn't all have to be outside. There is opportunities to volunteer to kind of add research, do work in the archives, and work online to really kind of help expand our understanding of our sites, but also how that kind of expands the wider knowledge of sites in different regions, kind of things. So if you look on the Heritage Records Online, I think I put a link to it in the chat, and I'll put that in again. There is actually a page on there about volunteering as one of our kind of archaeological volunteers. So have a look at that, and please do get in touch.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think it's an area that continues to grow for us, and actually it's so important in just delivering our work through and with volunteers. Kathy, Angus, have you got anything around the volunteering opportunities in your areas and what it brings to your role?
Yeah, I mean, I have a sort of various things that are going on. So there've been bits and pieces of monitoring work that James described going on, and then I have, you know, specific volunteers who might be doing a one-off research project, like with the World War II stuff in the Ogwen Valley. And then we have, so at one particular property, we have a group of archaeological, we call them the archaeological volunteers, and they've worked over the years on, you know, doing various bits of historic research and looking at LiDAR survey and mapping the stuff in the landscape, and that has led on ultimately to actually being able to undertake some archaeological excavation as part of their sort of progression through, you know, training in the archaeological experience. The issue is always the capacity that we have to, you know, help volunteers, to give them the time that they deserve. So that's always something of an issue, and so it's good to be able to. We also work quite a lot in partnership. So some of the ones I'm working on, we're working with other organisations, and they bring in some of the training for the volunteers as well. So it's sort of a bit mix and match, and we try to give everybody a good experience.
Yeah, and absolutely. A lot of our work is not necessarily just working with National Trust volunteers, but actually working with those other archaeological societies and interested groups who enjoy our land and want to be a part of it and want to help us, and that's a huge benefit to us.
I'd definitely echo that and encourage people to check out their local archaeological society, because actually a lot of those local archaeological societies down in the London South East region, you know, they've been going longer than the National Trust, so they have that kind of that legacy in the infrastructure, and actually, you know, another opportunities where we can work with the societies, kind of put training and kind of funding into those through joint projects is a real positive experience for us as a National Trust, and also the local community groups. So yeah, I definitely echo that. And, you know, I suppose in archaeology, it's just trying a look at keep asking the questions, and don't take no for an answer, I think is a good kind of thing. So yeah, take any opportunity and grab it while you can.
Absolutely. Kathy, you touched on capacity, which is one of those things that we always deal with, and I know someone mentioned in the Q&A that we do look after pretty extensive geographic areas, that we do have limited time. Angus, I wonder if you would want to speak to some of the challenges of that, and some of the ways that we try and focus our work.
Oh yes. Yeah, biggest pain, I suppose, in my career in the National Trust is not being able to do quite as much as I'd like to do. There's so much. I ended with that slide saying, there's so much to do, so much to understand, and that goes for every single property that we're responsible for, whether it's a massive place like the Ashridge Estate or a tiny little 1 acre place. There's always tantalizing things that we'd like to know about. So, that's one of the reasons why we call out for help, or we find ourselves very stretched. But I suppose philosophically, as rather an aged National Trust person, I think of the National Trust going on for another 100 years. So maybe in 100 years' time, the Angus Wainwright of that time will have answered quite a few of the questions that I've got now. We've got a long time to work out all this stuff. The National Trust is obviously preserving these places. Hopefully they're not threatened like the archaeology of areas outside the National Trust. So we have the luxury of spending time about understanding our archaeology, whereas, a lot of people out there in the commercial world, they have a week or 2 days to understand a site, and then it gets bulldozed for a HS2 or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've had it's an interesting question around climate, and we touched on it a bit in some of the talks, and I suppose how we're facing into some of the climate change issues. And I suppose our coastal sites do get an awful lot of attention in terms of climate change. That's one of the most visible places where we can see it happening. And I think we have something in the region of around 500 archaeological sites that we're predicting we may lose over the course of the next century as a result of coastal erosion and a gradual kind of loss of some of those historic landscapes. And of course, there will be sites that we don't yet know of. But it's very interesting, I think, that some of the other aspects of climate change are really beginning to show their impacts, whether that's sort of shrink heave on the clay geologies in the southeast and the impact on historic boundary walls and buildings, or whether it's just the more frequent temperature variations. I know that's had an impact through the freeze-thaw effect over at Chedworth Roman Villa. And similarly, of course, on wetland sites, which are going to be more prone to drying out. And certainly we've seen that from excavations at places like Starcar in the not too distant past that have shown how some of that material is degrading. The National Trust as a whole has recently produced a climate hazard map, working with an awful lot of other partners for the first time to really pull together a wide range of data that looks at climate predictions. And a big part of our next task really is to match up those climate hazards with the impacts that we see on the ground, and be able to start really prioritizing between our archaeological sites. But and that's of course working with a wide range of the heritage sector. But some of this stuff is very much playing out right now on the ground. I think, Kathy, perhaps you can speak to some of this from the Welsh perspective.
Yeah, it was a really good question. I think Richard put that question up, and the mapping that Tom has already mentioned is the sort of the way forward in terms of assessing the risks. But it's very difficult with archaeological sites to actually stabilize them. Ideal in particular with quite a lot of coastal sites in my area, and our much as we would like to try and stabilize them, we have to accept the loss. But what we are thinking about is adaptation. So for instance, moving footpaths away from cliff edges to cut down on the erosion that's going to send it tumbling down, and also monitoring. So particularly one big hill fort site that we are looking at in northwest Wales, where we've actually, again, with help from partners, the Royal Commission on Ancient Monuments in Wales have a project, and other partners as well have a big project where they're building a suite of techniques to record the eroding cliff edge. So that's a combination of drone flown photography, LiDAR, and also detection techniques on the inside of the hill fort itself, so geophysical survey, ground probing radar, to really capture all the information that we could possibly capture about that site, and to understand it as best we possibly can before we lose it, basically. So it's preservation by record, the old chestnut there. But we also get people involved with that as well. So this particular site is one of our community excavation sites, where we will actually be excavating some of the features right on the top of the cliff edge. Well, not right on the edge, that's not safe enough. But yeah, to actually gather the information about some fantastic Iron Age roundhouses that we know are under there. So yeah, and we're thinking about it, across lots of different sites, and we'll be taking different approaches at different places. So for instance, in other places where there are cliffs that might be collapsing but down onto people's properties, then we have got to find ways of stabilizing those, and that's by some pretty hard engineering types and very expensive solutions. But sometimes we have to, if there's a life and limb, that's when we have to prioritize the actual stabilization works. I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yeah, there are never any simple or easy answers around a lot of the impacts of climate change. It's always quite nuanced and quite tricky. I think to bounce from one end of the spectrum to the other, it's always a fun question, I think, for archaeologists. It's probably perhaps one of the more common, but ask a question around the best or the quirkiest or the strangest find that you've ever made or been involved with. Angus, I'm sure you've got a tale or two.
Yeah, well, I suppose within my National Trust career, the sort of weirdest, most thought-provoking thing I found was in Claydon House in Buckinghamshire. There was a project which involved lifting the floorboards in the room where Florence Nightingale was bedridden for many years. And under the floorboards, we were looking to find a lot of artifacts and things that had dropped between the cracks of the floorboards or left by builders, but it was very clean apart from a thick layer of dust. And we figured that dust was the skin, the dry skin of Florence Nightingale as she lay in her bed. And just to bring it up to date, with cloning technology, we wondered whether, in fact, we could clone thousands of Florence Nightingales to fill up the National Health Service, which is struggling so much at the moment. So if there's any geneticists out there, I do have a little bag of Florence Nightingale's skin.
Worth its weight in gold. She was a formidable figure. I think just 1,000 of those would do. James, Kathy.
I don't know how you follow that one, really. Mine wasn't going to be as fascinating. It's going to be potentially quite mundane, but it's kind of just really how it triggered a reaction in me. And actually, it was working on Exmoor, down as part of the Exmoor iron working project. So this was when I was at university down at Exeter, so a long time ago, or sort of a long time ago, and just working kind of middle of Exmoor, pretty much felt like the middle of nowhere, and the only kind of company were surrounded by cows that's spending their time trying to get in the hole or kind of lick any car that was sat around and try and eat your lunch kind of thing, but kind of revealing a kind of a pretty much huge hammer scale floor. So this is where, from an ironworking site, where the Romans were extracting iron and processing iron, and just the longevity they'd been there of kind of hammering this kind of iron, and the sparks going from the kind of the hot iron onto the ground, creating a huge hammer scale floor. And then in the middle of that was basically sat this void, which was the kind of the tree trunk anvil, and being able to kind of fill that with kind of almost like plaster of Paris to get the idea of actually the size of the tree trunk that was being used as the anvil. But just completely, it didn't feel like you're anywhere at all in Exmoor, just in the middle of nowhere, and actually having this site showing that longevity of use and how people have been basically sat there probably admiring the views like I was, but just working quite hard and in completely different conditions and surroundings. It was just kind of absolutely fascinating to me, and I think that's what's really triggered my kind of passion working with national parks and kind of heathland and open access sites. So yeah, not quite on the same scale as Angus's, apologies for that, but a different end of the scale. But then you don't want to find, maybe don't want to find anything too fascinating too quickly, because you've got to keep me get up in the morning to go back and see what I can find next. That's the joys of archaeology. Don't want to hit the press too quickly for finding something spectacular, because where do you go then?
It's a long career. It's a long career. Kathy.
Well, I mean, I don't have a favourite find, and I have never found anything, you know, spectacular. But the things that really, I think I really appreciate is when you find something like a piece of, you know, hand thrown pottery that's got a thumbprint or something, and you can really just imagine, you know, the person hundreds or even thousands of years ago making that object, and that's the sort of thing that sort of really gets to me.
And we had some a couple of questions from archaeology students, I suppose, asking for a little advice about getting into the profession, how you each came into the profession. You sort of touched on it a little bit, but what's the best way to get involved and to grow an interest in a career in archaeology?
Well, for my two penneth worth, I mean, I think the way I got into it is very similar to the way I'd recommend people getting into it now, and that's through volunteering initially, just to get a feel for whether it really is the kind of thing you want to get into. And as James said, there are many archaeological societies around who are crying out for strong, youthful people to help out. You know, and there's National Trust opportunities as well. And then working on some excavations or surveys in summer holidays, that sort of thing. And, you know, that'll give you a great grounding in the practical side of archaeology before you get into the theory when you go to university.
I think on top of what Angus has said there, I'd really kind of encourage people to check out the CBA Young Archaeologists Club as well, and the network of those across the country. I know they're kind of sometimes there's waiting lists and stuff like that, but that's encourage. I know there was a question on here about kind of young before pre-students as well, potentially getting into archaeology. Just gives you a bit of a flavour of the variety and opportunities. And whenever I get approached by a Young Archaeologist Club, I kind of bend over backwards to try and set up opportunities or kind of events for them to really engage people, because that's where I suppose my love of archaeology came from quite a young age, of kind of reading the various books and myths and legends and visiting sites, and like Angus, you know, volunteering and taking part. I was lucky enough to kind of grow up in Kenilworth in the Midlands, where we had a kind of English heritage or kind of English heritage castle, and because it'd been gifted to the local population but managed by English heritage, residents had free access to it. So I spent most of my time kind of running around a castle, playing all the sorts of games you might play running around a castle, just getting that hands-on side. I did go and do an archaeology degree, but majority of the people I've worked with just had that passion to be working on a site and that desire to be involved in archaeology. So there's so many different avenues in, and if you've got that desire, you know, it is taking those opportunities to volunteer and you know, as I said before, just kind of keep pestering people, because the majority of people that are working in archaeology now, we've all got here by doing bits of volunteering or kind of through the help of others. So majority of my colleagues I know will, any opportunity or request for kind of help or support, we say bend over backwards to give that. And I know we said about our kind of challenges of managing our workloads and stuff like that, but kind of again being able to partner with local societies or make connections is a really kind of powerful thing. So yeah, I would encourage people just to look at some of their local opportunities and just give it a go, really, and see. We never know where it might end up from there.
Yeah, and I would just back up really what Angus and James have said, and just get some practical experience. It will stand you in good stead going forward.
I don't really want to put myself out of a job, but I feel like to think that archaeology is something that everyone can do if you've got that kind of that interest and that ability to ask questions or look at something. Then all of us can do archaeology. It's just, you know, asking the right questions and basically seeing where those, you know, in that search for those answers, seeing where it takes us. So yeah, that's not kind of me saying, Tom, that anyone can do my job, but you know, I do think that is one of the real positives about archaeology, that you can come and give it a go on a site, even if that's just for a day, turning up to, you know, have a go. And if you get bitten by the bug, hopefully not by nothing else in the ground, then I say, who knows where it'll take you.
Yeah, and that there are so many facets of archaeology to explore as well. It is so many things and crosses over with so many other areas of the sciences and the humanities. There are a huge number of options. I suppose for you three, there's a sense, I suppose, of National Trust Archaeologists needing to be a jack of all trades. Have you developed your sort of specialisms within that, or is it just the variety of switching from the Second World War to prehistory within an hour?
Well, my when I moved to the East of England region, the first site I was given to study was Orford Ness, which is a atomic weapons research facility. I'd actually moved there from working in Stowe Landscape Park, you know, one of the most important and beautiful landscape parks in the country, and then to be on the rim of the world, apparently, looking at these massive concrete structures, and yeah, not understanding what they were for or doing, not liking what they were for or doing. It was personally extremely challenging, but there again, extremely interesting. And, you know, then moved on to Sutton Hoo, which was quite different, but again, I did some lectures at university on Sutton Hoo. I've, you know, had looked at some nice pictures of gold and thought, wow, they're very beautiful, and left it at that. And suddenly I had to be an expert on Sutton Hoo. But I'd just say, like Tom said, I think we have to be jacks of all trade and be willing to take anything on, but also possibly find out who the people who really know about that site or that period are, and get in touch with them and get their help to understand things, which is certainly what I had to do at Orford Ness and at Sutton Hoo, where I was lucky to be married to one of the great experts on Sutton Hoo. So that was certainly a help. I was able to give an impression of great expertise very quickly on due to listening to her carefully.
And free consultation advice as well, so that's always useful.
I don't think really much could add to that, apart from, again, just echo that. And what I was going to say was that not getting overly precious about kind of what I know and don't know, and yeah, kind of almost identifying who the experts are and being able to talk to them, because yes, as the kind of the day in the life can be flipping from one site to another site in a couple of hours in an email or a project, jumping around several thousand years backwards and forwards kind of thing. It's kind of completely fascinating, but yeah, can kind of potentially drive you a bit mad if you kind of overthink it too much. But yeah, that jack of all trades, but knowing that there is people out there that are really kind of specialized in certain areas, and being able to go to them and try and challenge them is almost kind of quite enjoyable as well, to kind of almost start those debates and conversations with colleagues. And again, you know, I would also say at this point that actually I've learned probably a lot more stuff from some of the volunteers I've been out with than actually some of my kind of tutors or kind of some experts. And that might not always be archaeology related. It might be about butterflies or something, that kind of thing. But that kind of two-way information share is just as important as being able to kind of reference every textbook or come up with exactly the right answer at the right time. And majority of people I think I kind of engage with are quite happy to say, actually, I don't know the answer quite at this moment, but let me go away and find out for you, and get a bit of that patience.
Yeah, likewise. And there's certainly never a dull moment, and I learnt quite quickly in the National Trust to have a stock, you know, to not feel uncomfortable about saying, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but I can find out for you. So yeah.
We had a question following on, and there is a huge amount of conflict archaeology out there, and it's come up in all of the talks and some of the questions. And there was a little follow on around First World War sites that we had. I think we have around 50 or 60 sort of main sites recorded in the National Trust that range across prisoner of war camps to training sites, to places of convalescence. But James, I don't know, it came up particularly in relation to your talk, and if there are particular First World War sites in the southeast region that we're looking at.
Yeah, so as Tom said, it's kind of about 50 or so that we've got registered in our system at the moment, but there's probably a lot more out there that we just haven't really discovered yet. I'm working across quite a few Heathland sites, and I think now with the ability to keep adding to our techniques, so potentially there'll probably be a few talks during Festival of Archaeology where there'll be mention of LiDAR. We haven't really mentioned that in this talk, which is slightly surprising, but it's one that you'll hear archaeologists talk a lot about. But kind of access to kind of the LiDAR mapping from an Environment Agency is allowing us and volunteers to spend a lot more time identifying kind of echoes of World War I training trenches that you can basically walk over a site and just not even know they're there. So that is bringing a load more of those World War I sites to kind of into our attention. But also that bit of just actually, I think as Angus and Kathy had both mentioned about, you know, being able to spend time looking at one site in detail, be able to do that research and start kind of picking back the different layers, then a lot more is going to come to light. And I would expect that majority of our Heathland sites, due to their use through history and their, you know, not being used for arable farming in the same way, would have seen military activity. It just means we just need to find that evidence surviving on the ground if it's still there. So I expect, yeah, that kind of the number that we put out there is probably a very small representation of what actually we have across our National Trust land holdings. So if there's anyone out there with an interest in World War I in certain areas, do get in touch.
Oh, sorry, Angus.
I'm sorry to butt in there, Kathy, but I just thought of a little anecdote from my first job on the Ashridge estate, where we didn't have the benefit of LiDAR back in those old days, so we had to crawl around surveying every single lump and bump on our hands and knees under bushes and things. And we were mostly, the interesting things we were finding was a Romano-British or late Iron Age field system. So this field system carried on, we were surveying it, not really understanding until we plotted it on paper, the shape of it. And when I got back from a particular area, the fields had started to shape into a strange sort of dog tooth effect, and I thought, that's a bit odd, that seems vaguely familiar to me. And I'd done the fatal thing, which is not really reading up enough about the site before I'd started, because what I hadn't known was that thousands and thousands of troops were trained on Berkhamsted Common in trench warfare, and they all dug trench systems, and they had a fully developed trench system, which is what I was actually starting to survey. So yeah, so it's now all surveyed, and it's a very fine monument to all that effort and bloodshed of all those soldiers that were trained there and then went off to the trenches.
Yeah, so in Wales, I'm aware that those rifle ranges that I was showing you earlier, they almost certainly went up to the, you know, immediately pre First World War. But when we were looking for, you know, sites when they were doing the First World War celebrations a couple of years ago, we were struggling to locate them really. So there's clearly, you know, a lot of work out there to identify them properly. You know, it's there's always something new to find.
And they're such they can be such evocative sites. I think that sort of conflict archaeology, actually from all periods, can be incredibly emotionally engaging. I certainly find it, even from the experience of being on the south coast, and we talk a lot about the conflict archaeology that's on our land, but of course, you know, we own vast tracts of the British coastline as the National Trust, and a lot of that land looks out to sea at places where there have been, you know, really momentous events, and actually to be able to look out on that and get that sense of history can be really powerful.
And Tom, a lot of National Trust properties were given to the National Trust as memorials to individual people or collective memorials to soldiers killed in both the First and Second World War.
Yeah. No, really powerful sites, actually. There's a really interesting question, which is again swinging from extremes, which is probably terrible chairing, but around what you think will be the really interesting, exciting archaeological finds of the future in the next 200 years. What would be interest to your future self?
It's going to be an Amstrad, isn't it? Early computers.
Oh, well, I wonder whether actually, I worked on an excavation in St Albans, the Gorhambury Roman villa, and I worked there every summer for 10 years. And we had a sort of fully developed camp there, which is now under the park. And I wonder whether actually an excavation of an archaeological campsite might be quite an interesting window on 1970s culture.
I quite like the. I think there's something in the news recently about one of these kind of archaeological recreation sites. I think they're looking at kind of rebuilding a new, or kind of planning in for a new one. But again, I think that kind of archaeological kind of experimental reconstruction sites where they built kind of Bronze Age roundhouses or Iron Age roundhouses, and how they, because I think it was actually about plastic at one. There was a kind of an article about kids' plastic lunch boxes at an archaeological reconstruction park. I'm going thing off the top of my head now. It's probably not the best thing to be doing at this time, but I think that would be quite fascinating. Or there's one I've had recently where I was working on a couple of sites, and we kept finding, and it links into the recent Euros, I kept finding these kind of various things like tokens, or kind of almost like your sticker books, but tokens that people have collected for different football players. I was doing a test pitting project in the New Forest, and we found a couple of these of different football players from different eras, and just seeing the different hairstyles was quite entertaining. And just the history of someone collecting these. Obviously, a number of people that like to collect stuff. I think, again, that's a bit of archaeology in itself. People learn to collect things as their kids, and then potentially what do they do with them when they don't need them anymore? Potentially bury them in the back garden for someone else to find later on.
I think there will be. I mean, I think we've seen this almost sort of exponential increase. I think, you know, the answer to, you know, in 200 years, who knows? But it'll be incredibly interesting to find out. It's one of those things where the scientific advances around archaeology have just enabled us to say so much more about the past, and continually just get a little bit closer to understanding what it might have been like. And certainly developments like LiDAR that we've touched on, the ability to survey huge areas, or the growth in other kind of remote sensing technologies. I think it just is really kind of expanding the horizons for archaeology. It's really exciting, but it poses its own challenges as well.
Actually, as you were saying that, I was just answering one of the questions in the chat about drones, about using drones to monitor sites, and just saying, yes, again, like the LiDAR and things now, we're regularly using drones to kind of scan, photograph, monitor sites, doing photogrammetry models of our buildings, because they're now so easy to access and make use of. And I think that's kind of, with the LiDAR, like with the geophysics equipment, and all those bits now, it's becoming so powerful but easy for kind of groups or ourselves to access. And most of the time, I suppose, as archaeologists, we've kind of wait for someone to invent something and wait for it to become a bit cheaper later on, or piggyback on and say, actually, there's a great opportunity here. So using the kind of drones to kind of, photograph and being able to send up a drone really quickly when we've got a really hot summer, linking back to climate change, to photograph parch marks. And we've seen that how kind of popular that's become in the last couple of years in the news about people kind of recording parch marks and adding hundreds of new archaeological sites into the record as well. Just being able to kind of react so quickly to get a drone up, or be able to do a piece of it rather than wait to try and commission a plane or someone to go on top of a cherry picker. It just becomes so much easier, and just a number of new sites being added as part of that it's amazing.
I think we're coming to the end of our questions. There is one which is, what's your favourite period of history to dig? Which I think it's like picking children, isn't it? You're not allowed to pick a favourite. Maybe you are.
Is that a question, Tom?
Is
which of my children?
Yes.
Well, I can only be a bit vague about this. You might have got a hint of it in my talk. I must say I struggle with prehistory. I like to have a story and some words and maps and bits of paper to go with my archaeology. So I do favour the more recent periods than prehistory. So I must apologise on behalf of my good colleague Shannon, who works in this region with me, who would have exactly the opposite view. So we're perfectly matched.
Kathy?
I actually rather like prehistory, because you can just sort of make it up as you go along. So yeah. Preferably Iron Age hill forts as well. I quite like those.
James?
Yeah, I'm kind of probably more towards the prehistory. The sites I've enjoyed digging most are actually kind of some Tudor shipbuilding sites, but that's part of a previous kind of role. But I know I talked in my talk about Sisbury, but to be able to, the opportunity to potentially reopen a Neolithic flint mine that has been excavated since 1950s, or across that site kind of thing, would be kind of, now again we've talked about the kind of advances in technology. We haven't talked about the different approaches, all the different changing bits of kind of the geoarchaeology and all those access to, again, huge amounts of information. I think that would be on my wish list to try and target. So maybe I should say Neolithic sites. So when I'm trying to convince people that they might want to let me reopen a Neolithic flint mine at Sisbury, then that might be I can use this recorded chat to show that I have that desire, and it's my favourite site, so it won't come back to haunt me.
I cannot think of anything that you could do to keep me away from a modern excavation of a Neolithic flint mine. I think that would be wildly exciting. Although having said that, I have developed a fondness of post-medieval archaeology, which does tend to be an awful lot easier to point out to people on the ground. The stonking big brick and stone foundations are often a little less challenging to illustrate than the slightly darker patch of soil. Fantastic. I think we've come to the end of our questions, and I'm just really grateful, firstly to James and to Kathy and to Angus for your time and candor this evening, and the presentations. I do want to say a huge thank you to the CBA as well for hosting us this evening. We do have a small poll to put up. It's just 3 simple questions. We'd be really, really grateful if you could answer that, because it really helps us when we're looking ahead to do more events like this in the future. And otherwise, it just remains to say thank you very much, take care, and good night. We hope to see you all soon.
Thank you very much, everyone. But everyone that's still here anyway.